Carm Logic, Identity. From carm.org, 3 Laws of Logic. Logic is the backbone of critical thinking. Logic is extremely useful for uncovering error and establishing truth. There are principles of logic, and I would like to introduce you to the first 3 laws of logic. These are very important: the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle. The law of identity states that A is A, an apple is an apple. In other words, something is what it is. If something exists, it has a nature and essence. For example, a book has a front and back cover with pages, and a car has 4 wheels, seats, doors, windows, etc. A tree has branches, leaves, trunk, and roots. This also means that anything that exists has characteristics. We recognize what something is by observing its characteristics. You know that a tree is a tree because you see branches, its leaves, its trunk, etc. Its leaves, it should be. Furthermore, if something has an identity, it has a single identity. It does not have more than one identity. In other words, if something exists, it has a set of attributes that are consistent with its own existence. It does not have a set of attributes that are inconsistent with itself. Therefore, we can easily conclude a cat is not a parachute, an apple is not a race car, a tree is not a movie. And we continue from carm.org. The law of identity states that A is A, an apple is an apple. In other words, something is what it is. If something exists, it has a nature and essence. For example, a book has a front and back covers, a car has 4 wheels, seats, doors, windows, etc. A tree has branches, leaves, a trunk, and roots. This also means that anything exists has characteristics. We recognize what something is by observing its characteristics. You know that a tree is a tree because you see its branches, its leaves, its trunk, etc. Furthermore, if something has an identity, it has a single identity. It does not have more than one identity. In other words, if something exists, it has a set of attributes that are consistent with its own existence. It does not have a set of attributes that are inconsistent with itself. Therefore, we can easily conclude a cat is not a parachute, an apple is not a race car, a tree is not a movie. What is the standard by which Carm has set up? This is what Matt Slick teaches on Carm as the standard. First, define terms. Second, make statements using those terms. Third, use scripture and logic to determine the validity or invalidity of those statements. Has Matt Slick followed his own standards in his formulation of logic? As we shall see, Matt Slick has failed dramatically and pathetically to fulfill his own standards. First of all, logic does not deal in objects. Logic deals with propositions, what Matt Slick mistakenly calls statements that represent objects. When we want to assert a principle of identity, and there are many forms of identity, the above form is only one, that stated as A is identical to A. So when Matt Slick says something is what it is, he's not doing logic. Second of all, there are many different forms of logical identity: reflexive, symmetrical, and transitive identities, to mention just a few. Does Matt Slick consider the functions of A in various orders and differing apparent variables? Has Matt Slick given us any indication of what A is identical to A entails? We quote from Principia Mathematica by Russell and Whitehead, Volume 1, page 168. X is identical to Y when every predicate function satisfied by X is also satisfied by Y. We cannot state that every function satisfied by X is to be satisfied by Y, because X satisfies functions of various orders, and these cannot be covered by one apparent variable. And from page 169, we should be thus led to identities of different degrees according to the degree of the function in respect to which X and Y agreed. Next, when Matt Slick asserts if something exists, it has a nature and essence, and later this also means that anything exists has characteristics. Has Matt Slick defined his terms, thus obeying his first principle to define terms? Does he define essence, attributes, nature, and characteristics? Does he explain the commonalities and differences of those terms? Does he explain the order, as explained in the above quote, and how those terms are related? Is the nature or essence of an object a collection of attributes or characteristics? Is the essence of an object more than a collection of attributes or nature or characteristics, or less than or different from those things? And once again we ask, does he explain the relation of all those things to each other, of the other terms he uses? Has Matt Slick met the second criteria he has stated above, make statements using those terms? This criteria he has certainly met. However, without offering well-defined terms, what has he really accomplished? What is he really asserting? Please remember, Matt Slick has no formal training in logic or critical thinking. His inability to fulfill his own requirements and lack of training is on full display here. And now Matt Slick's final criteria. Use scripture and logic to determine the validity or invalidity of the statements. Has Matt Slick used any scripture to define his terms? Has he used any scripture to show that logic, presumably, is the only tool to define scriptural truths? Has he shown the relation of scriptural truths and logic? Has he shown any methodology, from scripture or otherwise, that must be employed to use logic and scripture to guarantee that we arrive to scriptural truths? What scriptural statements has he employed in any of his descriptions? Without scriptural statements and lacking scriptural definitions of terms, and with no mention of a scripturally supported methodology to apply those terms and statements, doesn't Matt Slick fail his own standards? Doesn't Matt Slick lack intellectual integrity, not to mention inaccurate definitions, and lack competence in his entire pursuit? Doesn't his blatant lack of competency collapse his entire apologetic enterprise? Matt Slick is fond of saying to people, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Clearly he does not, and based upon his own failings of his own standards, Matt Slick should not be trusted in these matters.